Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar here, Health Plan Funding Options, Scratching the Surface of Comparing Fully Insured Medical Plans, Captives, and Self-Funded Plans. We have so much to get into today, so I am going to go through very quickly our housekeeping rules here. So just so that everyone is aware, the webinar is recorded, and you will get a copy of the recording as well as a copy of the presentation slides downloadable as a PDF. This webinar also has a Q&A section at the end, so we ask if you have any questions to save them for the end, as well as the fact that if you need to leave the webinar, you can also come back to the recording if you missed a portion of it as well. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our speakers today, since we have not one, but two lovely speakers who are going to be imparting such awesome knowledge to us today. So I will start with Mr. Kyle Von Ruden. Kyle has been with Houseman Group since 2008, if you can believe it, and became an owner in 2016. He primarily consults employer groups on developing and maintaining their high level of benefits while controlling very important costs. Kyle works with various size employers. He speaks publicly, as he is today, on alternative benefit strategies, including HRAs, HSAs, FSA, and he proactively keeps his clients educated on the ever-changing healthcare reform requirements. He understands that employees are business's greatest asset, and have a high-level benefits program will undoubtedly help with recruitment and retention. He has previous work experience actually as a property and casualty agent with Houseman Group and a commercial leader in the banking industry. Thanks for being here, Kyle. Next, I'll introduce Sarah Borders. If you are new to our webinars, maybe you haven't seen Sarah before, but if you've attended a couple, you've definitely seen her lovely face. She is an industry leader in providing guidance on legislative and regulatory topics such as ERISA, the Affordable Care Act, Section 125, COBRA, HIPAA, Medicare, tax advantaged accounts, and self-funded plans. In her previous roles as a VP of Benefits Compliance with NFP and Director of Compliance with the regional benefits firm, she's served hundreds of employers' compliance needs from identification to resolution. She's also written dozens of articles on regulations, and she frequently presents on these compliance topics, once again, just like she's doing today. Thank you guys so much for being here, and I will toss it over to Kyle Von Ruden to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassie, for the introductions. Again, my name is Kyle Von Ruden. Why are we here for this webinar today? To be better, to know more. I've been compelled to do this presentation based on the real-life scenarios I've been a part of as a consultant with employer benefits. And because it seems we employers are more vulnerable than ever due to the fast-paced increases in healthcare costs. The most common questions I continue to hear are, what are we not doing that we should be doing? And how do we know/measure if what we are doing is best for our company? Sarah and I aim to provide you just enough insight to dispel any sales myths and reinforce what you already might know but aren't 100% sure about. The following topics could individually take hours to discuss and should be discussed further, but today Sarah and I will cover some key points about them in under an hour. So let's go. This is a slide that I take to every single meeting that I've done. And if you are on this webinar and you know me, you probably have seen this. And if you haven't, you will see it when you see me next. I really think this is important to show what funding mechanisms for medical insurance are available in the marketplace, and to show what risk is associated with it. So on the far left, you see the lowest risk program that you could have would be considered an ICHRA, an individual coverage health reimbursement arrangement. As you go towards the right, it goes all the way towards reference-based pricing, which is extreme risk and not something that we will discuss today. Today's topics fall with fully insured, which is towards the left of risk. And then you have captives kind of in the middle. And then you have your ASO with spec and aggregate stop loss. That's going towards the right, which is going towards more risk. But I think it's important to know that you might be getting phone calls from people and they might be talking about ICHRAs and how they can save money, or these captives. And we just want to shed light on those three, meaning fully insured, captives, and self-funding today. Just to get you in the right mindset, I have a little bit of a trick question here. And this is not a car that's within my budget, so I thought I would have fun with the dollar amounts here. Based on this illustration of three choices, and you had $1 million to spend, which of the three vehicles would you purchase? The reason it's a trick question, and you probably know this, and it's maybe not even that tricky, but it's my idea, is we don't know until we look under the hood. Does it have airbags? Does it have brakes? What's the mileage? We need to know a lot more about that vehicle. Would it be nice to save $200,000 with my $1 million budget? Absolutely. But that might be a trap. That might cost me 1.2 million by the time I'm done fixing it. There are a lot of parallels to those cars and the cost when we're talking about spreading your risk and understanding what program makes sense for your company. Here are just some considerations because I think people on this call are from various size employers, various places. So just going to run through these bullet points. How many eligible employees do you have? Is it 50? Is it 100? Is it 300? If it's 1,000, you probably don't need to be on this because you're probably self-funded. Where is your company domiciled and where do most of your employees reside? Are they all in Wisconsin? Where in Wisconsin? Or are they spread across the US and beyond? Markets are different in how they are modeled. State requirements, as most of you know, are very different. Things are different in California than they are in Wisconsin. Your employees, the consumerism is different in various regions. What we think might be a good benefit here might not be the same for somebody down in St. Louis. I have to talk about HMO network versus national network. For example, Hausman Group, we have our insurance with a local HMO with our offices in Madison and Milwaukee, and that to us is the most competitive program for us to be, and that is fully insured. Have we talked about being in a captive, self-funded? Absolutely. We talk about it every year. We talk to you about these kind of programs. So what are we doing as an organization? We feel that our program, fully insured, still makes the best sense for us. Why? Because the HMO is still very competitive. What type of industry are you in? What data do you have available to understand your risk? Historically, a high frequency of high cost claimants can challenge the self-funding concept unless you can find some tools to reduce these claims. There's always a possibility. What about a low frequency, low cost claimant? Maybe you just have a few folks, 2 people that unfortunately might be struggling with cancer and they're fighting the good fight. Perhaps the cost of a captive or a standalone self-funded program is competitive. And if it's competitive next to a fully insured plan, you might have a great opportunity and perhaps the change is in order. Short and long term, how engaged and how much time/resources are available to allow you the ability to manage self-funding? It might be attractive to look at these proposals and say, this is fantastic, but you might be on your own and you might not have the capacity to take on some of this stuff. So just know that you have to be prepared. And then lastly, I sincerely believe in all 3 of these funding programs. I currently consult with employers in each of the categories, but it's really what program fits your company is the question. And a reminder, it's just like the car. You got to look under the hood first. Here's a table that I drew up. None of this is copied and pasted from Google. So if there are mistakes or questions, that's on me because I wrote the slides and these are from my words and from my experiences. But from left to right, kind of like the risk spectrum, you'll see that fully insured premiums, a fictitious number, $1 million. You're paying that fixed monthly premium for a 12-month contract. The carrier administers and pays the claims on your behalf after obviously the employees reach their maximum out of pockets. There is some or limited reporting depending on your employer size that we'll talk about soon, but there's less risk, there's less reward. $1 million goes out the door, it doesn't come back, but there's a much easier administration. The middle column is the captive. The captive, as you see, has 5 layers. You do get more reporting. Typically, it's weekly. You'll have a third-party administrator that pays claims on your behalf. You do have more employer compliance and more reporting that you would have to do. There's slight risk that I'll talk about soon. There's possible reward. There are certainly more tools to use to deploy to be more involved, more transparent, have more controls. Put yourself in a position where you can establish a flatter long-term curve. The third column is self-funding, and that's a standalone self-funding. And let me take a step back. As we go through this presentation, whenever I'm talking about a captive or standalone self-funding, they're both self-funding. It's saying the word too many times. So I'm just saying captive, but just understand that means self-funding. Self-funding, we're not going to go as deep in as the captive because it's very similar. You just take out the layer of the pooling premium that you would have with a captive. You'd have more risk. And we'll get into that next. Fully insured plans, let's start there. Typically, it's a 12-month fixed premium contract. The insurance carrier is bound. It's their promise that if you pay them premium every month, they're going to pay claims on your behalf, regardless of the limits. If you've been doing this long enough, you remember that $1 million was the ceiling that claims could be. And since the Affordable Care Act, that $1 million was lifted to infinity. So that has changed the times of how actuarial folks run numbers. Those of you that are fully insured, you know that it's a 12-month contract that comes up for renewal. And those renewals are typically based on many factors, but the main ones here are trend, which trend is defined as increased cost of medical and prescription care, demographics, utilization, and credibility. I will talk about credibility in further depth. Here we go. Speaking of credibility, I think it's important that we just take a step back. Even if you are fully insured, I don't know if you've had the information to see how your renewal is generated, but let's just take a moment to understand why being fully insured can protect you or maybe expose you to some higher limits. In this example, I'm going to go to the very bottom of the screen, and you see the premiums in the lower left corner are $470.60. I don't even have a plan on here. Again, this is just a fictitious scenario, but based on experience. The renewal is going up to $517.78. So how do we get from current to renewal? Well, they're going to look at your prior period matched up with your current period, and they're going to weigh it. So you can see in the prior year, even though it says current, the medical loss ratio was 85%. Not bad. I would call that break even with the medical carrier. Some could argue that, but that's what I'm sticking to. In the next year, the claims went up. Maybe there was a high cost claimant or two, and the medical loss ratio is now 105. They take those numbers, they take their annual trend. There's where you see the extra dots in the words other variables in parentheses. It's because this page probably has about 40 different variables, but we're really focusing on the ones that I think make the most sense that impact your renewal. So when you see the highlighted spot here that says catastrophic claims amount in excess of 50,000, what does that mean? That means that they're going to pay all of your claims for sure after you meet your maximum out of pocket, but they're going to reduce that overall spend. Say you have somebody that has a $200,000 medical treatment. They're going to reduce the impact of that against your premiums down to 50. And so they're going to take that premium, and then you see in red that they're going to throw a credit or minus a dollar amount to bring that MLR, bring those claims down to the 50,000 or less. And then you have your claims without catastrophic removed, $327 and $414. I hope I'm not going too fast. What do you do from there? Well, where it says experience weights, 30% is based on pretty much history, 70% is based on what we expect things are going to look like over the next year. So we're going to take those premiums times that, come to a combined number, which is down below, of $543.80. That would be what your premium would be generated at if that catastrophic claim category wasn't removed, if there weren't protections in place. So if you were self-funded, if you were in a captive, perhaps that number might be higher. because you still have those claims that are over that 50,000 threshold. So if you take a piece of paper, you draw a line down the middle. On this one, it's kind of to the left of the middle. They're going to take your experience and put 40% of the impact of your renewal towards your group's experience. And then they're going to share that with 60% of their manual rates, meaning their book of business, how it's running with groups similar of your size. And you can see that rate is $500. They take those two numbers, equate it to the 40/60. That brings it down to $517. Whoop-de-doo. Thanks, Kyle. Why did you explain this to us? Well, I explained it because 517 is less than 543. Being blended with the carrier's book of business, and if their manual rates are lower, brings your renewal down. So it's a 10.3% increase, but it's not a 20, it's not a 30% increase. So in this situation, maybe you're running hot, you are at 105% loss ratio, but thanks to credibility and so forth, you have a cushion. Next slide. So wrapping up that so we can jump into captives, some pros that go with the fully insured plan. Based on that situation, you are underpaying technically if your group is not running well. You'd be paying more if you were on your own. Bundled fees, admin costs, it's a package deal. It's a set it and forget it. Hey, thank you for the renewal. Based on our enrollment, this is what our costs are going to be. See you 90 days prior to our next renewal. So then some of the negatives that go with it. Well, if you're running well, if your MLR is 60% and your premium is lower than the company's manual rates, that's going to pull your rates up a little bit. But that might be okay. If the column on the left where you like the bundled fees, you like the admin costs, sometimes it's okay to pay more for convenience and for value. You're limited and delayed in reporting. For those of you on this call that have less than 50 employees, you're not getting any reporting. If you have 51 to 99, you'll get basic reporting. Something that might look like, here's your top 10 high cost claimants. Here is your MLR, your medical loss ratio. And if you have over 100 employees, you're definitely going to get access to more data. I hope your consultant is making sure of that and asking for that data on your behalf because it's there and you have the right to review it since you are paying a hefty premium. But at the end of the day, it's still not as transparent as a captive or self-funding where you're getting that weekly reporting and you're paying those claims weekly. Another negative, short window of renewal release timing. Some carriers are 60 days, some are 90 days. And if you're not getting that timely reporting and some of that reporting has a lag, it's a great, what's it going to be, Kyle? Well, trend is this. What do you know about your group? You might be 2 or 3 points above trend. You might be 2 or 3 points below trend. And then just limited tools. What do you do? There's some really wonderful wellness programs, some mental health value adds that these carriers bring. They bring a lot of these value adds to you as a part of the package deal. So that's fully insured. The focus today really, and what you've probably been waiting for me to talk about, are captives. And I got to give a shout out to my friend Carrie Davis, who gave me the quote from Spider-Man's uncle. With great power comes great responsibility. I thought that was fantastic when it comes to self-funding. And so below it, I have my own quote that I copied. In the case of a captive, with more control comes more responsibility. And that can be a wonderful thing. Again, I like all three of these. The 5 components that go into a captive. What is the role of the consultant? What is the role of me? I need to be able to be knowledgeable on this subject matter. I need to know what tools are available that we can put a part of this program to help you minimize costs and maintain low costs, try to avoid future unknown costs. Identify a captive, identify a good TPA, identify a good PBM, and make sure that you have the right network so that you don't have disruption to your staff. The last thing we all want to do is tell our employees that they all have to change doctors. Number 2, and I think the most important one on here, is the role of the third-party administrator. They assist in building your coverage contract. So in real life example, we would do a meeting with your TPA. We would put together with the TPA's expertise and your decision-making and knowledge, what your coverage looks like, what your contract language is going to read. And then after that, when this plan is in motion, they're going to administer and pay the claims on your behalf. You're going to get a weekly report. It's going to say these were the prescriptions, these are the medical costs. We're going to pull this money and we're going to pay it on your behalf. They are also, if they are a good TPA, they're going to be somebody that the employees could talk to about any kind of network questions or claim issues they might have. For those of you that work with us, that you're probably thinking that sounds like housekeeping. That's exactly right. We would help as well. Therefore, I put that last bullet point. They're your best friend. And then the role of the pharmacy benefit manager, they need to be negotiating those prescription costs and resources. They need to be knowledgeable to know where you're going to get Humira, where you're going to get Stelara, where you're going to get these different drugs and how much those are going to cost. The role of the reinsurance, or some people refer to it as stop loss carrier, they're going to pay claims in excess of what you, the employer, pays, and then what the captive pays up to. So they're the third layer of protection that pays to infinity. And then really just identifying that captive that's financially sound. We don't want to put somebody in a captive that's going to fail, doesn't do risk management, doesn't screen their groups before they let everybody into the pool. So they're the ones that just kind of handle all the finances of it. Perhaps you get some collateral back. Sometimes they hang on to that collateral going forward. This illustration I really like because this just shows you where your dollars typically go when you're in a captive. That 50,000 spec that I talked about on fully insured, I'm just trying to keep apples to apples, even though it seems like apples to oranges. But let's just say 50,000 was the pooling point fully insured. Let's make 50,000 the captive point or the spec point for you. So the first square or rectangle, I should say, that is what the employer claims they're expected to pay. So when you're looking at a proposal, it's going to have something like this, and it's going to say, out of all the different money, we propose that you're going to probably pay up to about 350,000. Up, and that's that 50,000 spec limit. That's per belly button. Sorry, I forgot to say that first. So if you have a family of 4 working for you, each belly button, the exposure is 50,000. And if I'm in that family, my name is Kyle Von Ruden, I work for you. Your plan design says that my out of pocket is 5,000. I'm going to pay 5,000. You, my employer, are going to pay 5,001 up to 50. After that point, that's when the captive, the pooling, is going to pick up the 50,000 up to that very high catastrophic amount of 500,000. And that's where the reinsurance kicks in. So you can see you're paying in every category. You're paying claims. You are paying into the pool. That's a premium to have the captive take that cost above 50,000 off of your plate. And then you're paying a premium. You're paying a stop loss carrier to help with those claims well in excess of 500,000. Down below, I just say 60,000 in miscellaneous fees and services. And then on the right, I just put a little note there that typically you are asked, depending on how it's structured, for some collateral money up front. Whether you see some of that back or that just stays in there for the next year, that remains to be seen. And then last but not least, I'm not going to dwell on this, but everybody should know the term laser by the time we're done with this presentation. That is somebody that's got claims that are probably in excess of 300,000. Could be $1 million, could be $1.7 million. I've seen claims up to $1.7 million that are going to pop up on your claims experience. Those are what keeps us up at night. Sometimes you can build in things to offset and anticipate, like a surcharge. You can build in a cost to expect that maybe that's going to happen to protect you. I will come back to lasers in a couple more slides. So anyhow, just wanted you to see where your money is going based on $1 million. If you were to get a proposal, I hope it looks a lot fancier than mine. This is just Kyle Von Ruden spreadsheet 101. Typically, you're going to get 5-6 pages that talk about worst case scenario. Your curve full insured is going to look like this, but if you go to a cabinet, it's going to look like that, and so forth. But here, again, I want to focus on key factors. And with respect to your time, I just want to focus on what matters to you in that 5 to 10 page proposal. As I showed on the previous diagram, specific limit, AKA spec, that blue column, that would be, all right, we have risk tolerance that we will pay claims up to 50,000 before the captive. What is that going to cost me? Stop loss carrier is going to say, well, if we're going to come in after the 2 layers, you're going to pay us 150. The plan costs, which I outlined below, are your TPA, your consultant. I don't like to use the word broker, but someone like me, consultant, any kind of amended options, add-ons, things that you wanted to attach to your program. That is the 60,000 on there. Those are your fixed costs. Variable costs would be your claims. You don't know. Are they going to be 350? Are they going to be 500? Are they going to be 200? Pooled premiums. That's a product of your spec. And then that collateral, is that collateral going to go up? Is it going to be reduced and so forth? So you get to page 5 of your proposal and it shows you this. It's going to say your projected cost based on the group after going through medical underwriting. We expect you to spend 850,000. That's lower than $1 million. That's a good start. Your maximum cost, we expect to be $1 million. Okay, well, now you're pretty close to that fully insured plan. But if the idea of having more tools, having more controls, having more oversight is attractive to you, then $1 million compared to $1 million, this might be a good option for you. The second one is literally the same thing. It's a, you know what, let's just see, is it going to cost us a little bit less if we have a little more risk and go from 50 to 55? I'll skip to the bottom. You might have a little bit of a less projected risk or cost, but you got a little bit more of exposure going from 50 to 55. Maybe your maximum cost is going to be worse than if you stayed in the 50,000. So I'm looking at this and going, there's not a lot of money between the two. I think me going from fully insured to a captive, I think we're just fine starting with the 50,000 if that aggregate makes sense to me. All right, pros and cons. I got to move this on my screen. I hope I can move it. Oh, okay. But anyhow, just in a nutshell, wrapping up the captives, it is, in my mind, knowing groups that we've worked with, it is a good entry-level way to experience what self-funding is like, but reducing your risk. And reducing your risk means you're coming in with a 50,000 spec. You can customize your health plan. You can mimic exactly what you had with your fully insured plan. We want an HSA plan. We want it to be 3,200 embedded, 6,400 family. Because now you are paying claims and you are seeing things on a weekly basis, you are going to have the opportunity to proactively take some steps. You know, let's focus on some dietary things that would help people manage weight, manage diabetes, smoking cessation programs, because now that you are seeing the exact dollars that you're spending on these types of claims, you can have a more targeted wellness campaign. You also can look at possibly attaching some medical carve-out options or some pharmaceutical negotiating companies. They might do some international outsourcing for you to reduce that cost. Negatives. It's a higher exposure per belly button, right? Family of 4, that's 200,000 that you're exposed to paying for as the employer. That's no joke. The reality of it is if you got 50, let's just say 100 employees, 100 employees aren't going through 50,000. Very few would. So it's kind of the law of large numbers that I have below. How many premiums can I collect? What is the volume of that to offset what the potential risk might be? You are going to have to allocate more time. You're going to maybe have to have a team. You're going to have to bring in somebody from your accounting because they're going to be spending bills every week. And it's not going to be the same bill. It's going to be a different bill. You might not have bills for the first 2 months because the claims haven't gone through. So I will keep going just so that I make sure we have time for Sarah afterwards on the compliance part of it. And this is easier. Actually, let me go back to an example. I had an example on one of the slides. This example. So a success story with a captive. So we work with a group that was here in the Madison area, outgrew their HMO, had employees going into various states. And so there were more people out of state than in state. They had about 80 employees, and they were with a national PPO network. They had some high cost claims, but only a couple. And they were looking at not just 10, 15% renewals, 50, 5-0. So we looked at it and said, you know what, there's only really a couple exposures. Let's take a look at the captive. I think we have the tools that we could use to help minimize those couple risks to help bring down that cost. Ended up being a 15% increase on the front end, but it is going to be a more stable program for them year after year because they can respond and react to certain types of claims and target those conditions. Okay. How are we on time? Standalone. So again, it's going to look and feel like a captive because why? A captive is self-funding. Standalone self-funding is it's now you, the TPA, the PBM, the stop loss carrier. You no longer have the pooling premium. You are no longer a part of that captive. You aren't a part of, let's just say, 400 employer groups sharing in the risk. The roles are the same, so I'm not going to go through those. But I can't emphasize enough to identify a consultant that has the knowledge to talk about this. Here are the layers of where your money goes. You'll see it looks a little bit different. Now you don't have the 50,000 spec, you have a 75,000 spec. You see that the employer claims responsibility has gone up. You see that the reinsurance has come down to 75 where it was at 500,000 before. You probably weren't paying a lot of premium for a stop loss carrier that starts at 500. But I bet the premium would go up a little bit if you asked a stop loss carrier to come down to 75,000. So really, we see a lot of self-funded groups, standalone self-funded groups that are closer to 100,000 to even 200,000 spec limits. Down below, just trying to add my math on the following sheet, there's about 28,000 in miscellaneous fees and services, which are those fixed costs. And then I can't forget putting that asterisk. There is that possibility that you could have a laser at some point, and you just want to have the conversation ahead of time so that you are prepared to respond. Like the captive, my one-page kindergarten spreadsheet version, your proposal would look a lot different like this. But what I want you to look through as I'm talking is some of the variables. Again, not all of the variables, but what does it look like when you get a proposal for a standalone self-funded program? The annual premium under cost, the $344,000, that's what your stop loss premium is. And then if you go down to variable cost, the $623, that's what your claim costs are going to be. So an example, I think examples help explain insurance. 450 life group inside and outside of the HMO market, but all employees live in Wisconsin. They do have dual network. They're able to go in different parts of Wisconsin that are different networks. They have a couple plan options for those people to choose. And they have a spec level of up to 75,000. Again, employee pays up to 5,000. Now the employer pays 5,000 up to 75,000. And then your work is done. You might just get hit next year on your renewal because you know you're going to have those claimants going forward. Here you have total expected at the bottom of the blue column, $1 million. Okay, good start. If you don't go through $1 million, that's what you save. The maximum expected aggregate is $1,250,000. The 125 is something that you typically see on your proposals, and it's probably a good place to start if it's your first couple years going into it. And then the peachy, I don't know what color that is that I put, but let's just say it's peach. That next column is putting in a laser. What happens with a $500,000 laser? Well, the expected was $1 million. Now it's $1,500,000. And then it's $1,700,000. What happens in most of the cases is you're going to get your renewal. You're going to be talking about your renewal 6-5 months before because you have all of this data, especially if you're a few years into it. Now it's going to be, what are we going to do with our $500,000? The stop loss carrier is going to price it and say, well, that's your problem. We're going to move that over to a third column, and you, the employer, you're going to pay that $500,000. And now your expected is $1 million. So one way or another, it's $1,500,000. I don't want to scare anyone away from this. This is the reality. Lasers do happen. But if you have long-term focus and discipline, That's not going to rattle you. It is what it is. If you get 5 good years and you have one bad year, that's probably not a bad curve to be on. Pros and cons. I'll just read a couple of these. I think that you for sure get more insight because you are getting the reporting. You know every single thing about everybody that works there, which maybe that's not exciting, but what excites me is I need data to do my job. I can't consult as well if I don't have data. And if I'm looking at that, I can work with you to say, perhaps this makes more sense. Or what about this scenario? When you are a standalone self-funded and you've got 500 enrolled and you've got a big spread of premium versus your risk, maybe you sponsor your employees to have a membership at some direct primary care clinic, an independent one, where, we all know that access to care is getting more difficult, but if there's a standalone and you want to pay a membership, go for it. You can do that, and that's going to help with your overall spend. Customize your health plans. Again, medical carve-outs, prescription outsourcing, things that you can control, that you can set up. Hey, 80,000 spent on that prescription. What if we outsource that and get it at 10,000? You just took 70,000 out of your claims experience. That is the stuff that excites me. Some of the negatives, it's a higher exposure. You're 100,000 spec versus 50. The fluctuating spends. You can set something up where you pay ahead of time so that when you do get hit, it's a flatter spend throughout the 12 months. It's something that I would highly suggest. And there's additional layers of insurance. There's more people that are involved in this thing. And really, your consultant and your TPA are probably going to be the two most important people that interact with you throughout that year. And the reality, it's the law of large numbers, premium versus exposure. Spread your risk. You are now the insurance company up to that spec. That is my portion up to this point. I'll see you soon. I'll come back with some wrap-up comments. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Kyle. That was really interesting, actually. As you can see, what Kyle went through is complex, right? Very complex, a lot of knowledge necessary to build out any sort of version of self-funding. And with it, we want to stress that when you go to any sort of flavor of self-funding, starting out with a level funded plan to captives to fully unbundled self-funded plans, even so much as to say an HRA, it brings with it baggage, not insurmountable baggage, but we want to kind of convey the difference between going from fully insured to self-funding. I liken it to when I used to rent an apartment when I was in college. I paid a set amount for my lease. They fixed everything and I moved out and I had no more liability there. When I got older, I bought a house and I own that house now, and I am responsible for everything that goes on in that house. And that could be making sure the plumbing works, fixing any sort of leaks, making sure our pool is, running properly, like just any number of things that can go wrong. We sort of self-fund it, right? We have insurance for the catastrophic things, like if the house burns down, goodness, if God forbid that happen. But you have to think about it that way, from going from a fully insured program over to a self-funded, even if it's called a captive, it really is just it's a way to describe a self-funding arrangement. And so with that comes additional compliance considerations. And so that's what we want to make sure that you understand if you are self-funded now and what that would look like for you. So we have, I think, this table here, we kind of spanned it over 3 slides. And this is something that we pay particular attention to at Hausman Group, because a lot of other consultants out there don't even think about these things. They oversimplify them, and you really, really have to know what you're getting yourself into. So first of all, when we're looking at this table, you can see sort of who's responsible when you're fully insured or you're self-insured. Again, just include in your mind the word captive under the column of self-insured. And what are those considerable compliance considerations that your team is going to need to figure out or outsource in some manner. So the liability aspect, this is a large part of it, having to purchase stop loss, getting a great TPA in place that manages these claims well, because they're not all created equal either. And being just more involved with the claims and appeals decisions that happen. When you're self-funded, you are involved to a large aspect into how claims are paid if there's an appeal or there's a denial. And there could be an instance where you'd have to set up a committee and things like that. So you have to understand, again, that you have more control, but with it comes more responsibility. And the sort of thought or the expectation that you're actively managing these claims rather than letting the insurance company just manage it and you just pay a premium. Next, we have something that's newer to the landscape of compliance, which is the CAA. So we love to use acronyms in this industry. I know all industries probably have them. CAA stands for Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. This particular piece of legislation that was passed, back in 2021, carried with it a substantial amount of additional reporting requirements and standards for fiduciaries that didn't exist prior to this. So it really brought with it all of these new requirements that kind of snuck by us. And when they started to kind of roll out through regulations, we're like, wow, this is really a lot of work. And so when you are fully insured, for the most part, the carrier takes care of that. And if you all have been on a compliance review with us, we really do talk a lot more about those kind of things when you're self-funded. When you move to a self-funded or captive arrangement, then you really have to select which TPA or vendors you're going to work with that are going to perhaps take some of the heavy load off of your plates, but you're ultimately legally responsible to make sure that they get done. With the fully insured arrangement, there's some ambiguity here, but mostly they're responsible and they're going to be holding the bag. Again, using that renting versus owning illustration, you have to think about it this way. The next line, MHPAEA, NQTL, comparative analysis. So what in the heck is that talking about? So that's talking about mental health parity rules and the requirement that came under the CAA to have this comparative analysis that basically shows the work as to how the mental health benefits that are paid under your plan are paid as good as or better than the medical and surgical side of things. So the more physical treatments as opposed to the mental health side of things. So in the past, mental health benefits have been covered substantially lower than the medical and surgical side of things. So like physical therapy, hospital stays. When you looked over at the mental health side, they were, often not covered at all. They were substantially higher out-of-pocket costs. The network adequacy wasn't there. The copays are higher. You've all seen these types of things. And even sort of more behind the scenes things that go on, like denials or having to go through so many more steps or, just outright denials of these types of coverages that can happen. So what this is saying with the MHPAEA NQTL comparative analysis is that the employer or the carrier, in the case of a fully insured plan, has to conduct and be able to provide a comparative analysis to kind of show the work of the plan. Like, okay, if these particular types of benefits are covered, how are they different and why are they different? And is that a failure on the part of the comparative rules? So without getting too complicated and technical here, when you're self-insured, you again hold the bag for making sure that this NQTL analysis is conducted and that your plan has been scrutinized by a consultant or an attorney. So really, this again is that heightened level of scrutiny that's required. You'll just see this as a theme when you're self-funded, because again, you own the plan. And so the government looks at you like, well, you should know what's going on with your plan and making sure that it's compliant under all these rules. Yes, the TPA can help, and in large part they do, but they really do take the stance of we're not the employer plan sponsor. Here's what we think. And you're sort of left to make sure that we're correct. It's kind of the way that they look at this. Then we've got state insurance mandates as well. So what's a good thing, I think, about going to a self-funded arrangement is that you're no longer subject to state insurance laws. Now, there may be some employment laws in your state that would apply outside of the insurance code, the rules where the insurance laws come from. But self-insured plans, however, are exempt from state insurance laws. So if you have a specific, for example, just having to be on a fully insured plan if you're under 50, most of the time you're going to only be able to enroll in an age-rated plan, which can be beneficial if you're running large claims, right? But if you're not, you're running well, then that can be a substantial savings, possibly. But again, you have to consider all of these requirements. So that is one aspect that you can kind of get out of state insurance law and all of the baggage that that carries with it, because you're over here self-funded and you can take advantage of ERISA preemption. You may have heard this term before. Then we have these kind of pesky fees we call PCORI fees. And PCORI fee stands for Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. So the PCORI fee is a fee that was imposed on group health plans from the ACA. So way back when the Affordable Care Act was passed, this was the fee that's imposed to fund some sort of Washington think tank, essentially. So this fee still lingers. It's not a very big fee, but it is out there. And when you are any flavor of self-funded insurance, you have to make sure that the PCORI fee is paid directly by your organization to the IRS via Form 720. If you're with a carrier, a fully insured carrier, they have to pay it. And so that's one thing that gets taken off your plate if you go to a fully insured or stay with a fully insured plan. Next slide, please. Okay. So one of the other things that you have to ensure is happening is having a summary plan description in place. Sometimes we use the term WRAP SPD. So whether you're fully insured or self-funded, you need to have what we call a WRAP document in place. It doesn't mean that either type of funding arrangement gets out of this requirement. And the reason for that is because under this rule called ERISA, all ERISA plans, even from small to very large, have to have a fully compliant plan document. And so most employers do not have what ERISA sees as a plan document. They have maybe a carrier booklet, a carrier certificate of coverage. Maybe even if you're currently self-funded, you have the medical TPA's medical booklet. That in and of itself isn't sufficient to be considered a compliant plan document. So what do we do about that? We implement what we call a wraparound document, or WRAP for short, that basically fills in the missing required ERISA language. So whether fully insured or self-insured, you do have to have a WRAP plan in place. So that really doesn't change from going from one funding arrangement to the next. Same thing with a Section 125 cafeteria plan document. Sometimes we hear that called a POP, or a premium only plan. This would apply whether self-funded, self-insured, in other words, fully insured, or any flavor of it as well. Now, when we get into HIPAA, privacy and security, this is where things get real. So when you are fully insured, you can be designated as what we call hands-off. And that means basically that while the group health plan does produce, transmit, save, create protected health information, or called PHI, the employer is hands-off and cannot see any of that data. They don't have access to PHI because the carrier does, and they are the ones who are responsible for ultimate HIPAA privacy and security requirements. When you move to a self-insured arrangement, then you can no longer be hands-off. You must be hands-on. There's no way not to be, because again, I own the house. I can outsource things, but I'm responsible for what goes on in this house ultimately. So when you're self-insured, there are numerous requirements that apply to be compliant with privacy and security under HIPAA. What does that mean? Essentially, if you're an employer who is self-insured, you have to conduct a risk assessment of your organization, both on the privacy side and the security side, meaning like your computer, the laptops, the phones, the email, the servers, any sort of PHI that could be transmitted. You're responsible to make sure that there's protection around that it doesn't get out to the wrong people or non-designated individuals. You have to make sure you have business associate agreements in place and vet your vendors. You have to conduct training and make your employees go through training at least annually is what we would recommend. And then based on what was found in your risk assessment, you have to have policies and procedures in place that actually relate back to what it is you have in your organization. There needs to be breach procedures and notification procedures. So HIPAA isn't just simply a notice or getting some standard policies and procedures and then throwing them in a handbook somewhere. It's more there's more to it than that. So again, this is what you're looking at when moving over to a self-funded arrangement. Again, not insurmountable, and a lot of employers go this route, and they are fully fine with being able to conduct their HIPAA risk assessments. But just know there's a huge difference in that area. Then we have first level claims and appeals determinations. I mentioned that before, that you're much more involved with the claims decisions when you're self-insured. And this can be something that an advisor like Housing Group, specifically Kyle, can help with in these sort of claims decisions. That's really where you have a great consultant and a great TPA that can assist with, these decisions. Then we have COBRA. So COBRA, of course, is applicable to fully insured or self-funded, doesn't matter. But when you are self-insured and you are subject to COBRA, you will have to determine what your COBRA rates are going to be based, again, on sort of the expected claims cost, the fixed cost. You have to take in this determination, and there's a specific way that has to be done, rather than it just being the full amount of the insurance premium. So it's a little more complex as well. Next slide. And kind of rounding out what else you have to plan for would be the Form 5500 for your health and welfare plans. So whether fully insured or self-insured, you do have most likely requirements under the Form 5500 filing. It's just simply an informational filing that has to be submitted to the Department of Labor. And if you're under 100 plan participants as of the first day of the plan year, with either type of funding arrangement, you need to file this particular form to the Department of Labor. If you have a retirement plan, you're really used to this. And there's also a similar filing, again, on the health and welfare side. Now, there's really not a huge difference, but when you're talking about a self-funded plan or a captive or any sort of arrangement, there would be a different schedule that needs to be filed. So that just needs to be accounted for. But again, the same thresholds can apply here. Now, if you were in a situation where you had a very, savvy arrangement where you put a trust into place, then there would be additional 5,500 filing requirements, but that's probably not most employers on this plan. Medical loss ratio rebates. If you're self-insured, you don't have to worry about refunding participants on the plan as you would if you were fully insured. So there's a little bit less of a hassle of having to hand out any sort of rebates that come from an insurance carrier. Don't see a lot of those lately. I think they have figured out how to not have to send those out at this point, but it does come up from time to time, basically depending on where you're located. Section 6055 and 6056 reporting. This one catches employers off guard, I would say, the most. So if you're moving to self-funded plan, any sized employer will have to at least file the 1095B as in boy forms to the IRS directly electronically. So if you were fully insured in the past, you have maybe 30 employees, and you never had to do any sort of ACA filing, that would change if you go to a captive. And again, the captives, the TPAs, a lot of times will help and assist with the data that has to be populated, but not always. So you have to be so careful about who's going to supply me the data. Are you going to assist to any degree? And if not, do we have the capacity to be able to file the B forms? Again, not insurmountable, but it's something you have to plan for with your payroll software, for example. And then lastly, the Section 105H non-discrimination rules, they don't apply to fully insured plans, but they do apply squarely to any sort of self-funded plan. So what this means is that you have to conduct non-discrimination non-discrimination testing and be able to correct any sort of situation where you've got a highly compensated individual or HCI or group of them who is getting a better benefit than non-highly compensated individuals. So first, again, you have to do the testing itself and then correct any failures if you do, in fact, don't pass the testing. So again, it does seem like there's a lot of things to speak through. The TPA can handle a lot of it. Hausman Group can help with a lot of this if you're a client of ours. But we just want you to be aware before you buy this car and move into your own house or whatever kind of illustration you want to use here. But let us know if you have any questions. I know we have a couple minutes left, but that's essentially the main compliance requirements that need to be considered.
Thank you, Sarah, for that. Just wrapping up, I know we're almost out of time and maybe there's a question or two that we can get to, but just a couple key points to address is, data can't predict the unpredictable, but it can certainly justify what direction you think you might want to go with funding your medical program. You have to be confident in the level of risk your organization can budget for. Is this a one-person team? Is this a five-person team? How are we going to do the various things from what Sarah talked about, compliance, reporting? There's wonderful tools out there, but we want to make sure that you're in a position that you can successfully run a program like that. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands that this is not a 12-month, let's see if this works and go back. This is you're going to do this for 5 years. And the reason being is you might have to work out some kinks and experiences before you get to that third year, before you start seeing that trend start to go down. But the trajectory for most groups will look good if you give it the opportunity to do that. So if you're leaving your fully insured program and you're going self-funded, stay committed to it. As long as you have good consulting and you're put in with the right TPA as well as the good captive or stop loss carrier. And just check with your peers. I think a lot of people on here, you're on this webinar because you're gathering information. You're probably doing this with other things too. Check with other folks that you heard have gone into a captive or self-funded. And just engage your consultant. There are points and there are always counterpoints. And you need to have those conversations up front. So again, all three work. We're still fully insured. We've had double-digit renewals. It still makes sense for us to stay that way with our HMO type plan. Perhaps there'll be a day when we cross that bridge and look at a captive or self-funding, but captive, to come back to that, it is a very good entry-level way for you to experience what self-funding is like. That's a wrap. Thank you.
Thank you both. We are 1 minute away from being out of time. So I did see that there were a couple questions that came through. If you put in a question, just know we're going to reach out to you personally because we want to be able to give you full answer and don't want to rush through it. So if you put a question in, we will reach out to you. Thank you again for everyone who attended, and thank you for watching this recording, getting to the end here. We are really grateful to have such knowledgeable people like Kyle and Sarah. So we would love to hear what you thought of this webinar. After the webinar ends, a survey will come out from Zoom. If you wouldn't mind filling that out and just telling us what you thought, if you have any other questions or you'd like to just provide us with feedback on new topics, we'd love to hear about it. So thank you again for coming. And Kyle, Sarah, thank you guys for presenting. And everyone have a lovely lunchtime. It's noon, so go get some lunch.
Thank you.